God didn't say you will never get to eat from this tree, but not now. And how often that is in our own life, you know?
Right.
We so often desire things before we're ready for them. And when we do, it doesn't end well.
Welcome to the Be Filled podcast. Together, we will explore the deepest desires of the human heart and how our Creator wants to fulfill your every longing. Join us as we explore the beautiful teaching of St. Pope John Paul II on the theology of the body. We are so excited you're here on the journey with us. Open your heart to be filled. Hello and welcome to the Be Filled podcast. My name is Rochelle Parker and I'm so grateful to be with all of you listeners today and my friends, Katie Davis and Sister Cecilia Ann. I almost said Patty. She's not here today. We're going to miss her so much, but she had some family things going on. And so I know she'll be praying for us. I have no doubt.
Yes.
But we are just so excited to continue this journey with all of you through St. Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body. Last episode, we started a new chapter entitled Christ Appeals to the Human Heart. And we introduced the scripture passage that John Paul II is focused on from the Sermon on the Mount. And there he's deepening the original command not to commit adultery by saying, whoever looks at a woman to desire her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And desire in this context, there was a great footnote that really kind of defined that. It's when man or woman fails to see the full attractiveness of the other person and reduces it to the attractiveness of sexual pleasure alone. In this episode, we're going to continue with a section entitled The Man of Concupiscence, and that covers audiences 26 to 33. We're all laughing because you're going to hear that word a lot, and sometimes we might stumble over it. I don't know.
Not something you say every day.
No, it's not. So today we're going to talk about audiences 26 through 28, but let's talk about the word concupiscence. It's a big, long word, but if you look at the Latin and break it down, it means beginning to desire. And that often just gets translated to the word lust. I looked in the Catechism to see kind of what the formal definition is. And it said, human appetites or desires which remain disordered due to the temporal consequences of original sin, which remain even after baptism, and which produce an inclination to sin. So that's really the key word, I think, there at the end is inclination to sin. So concupiscence in and of itself is not sin. It's just kind of our tendency towards sin. But what John Paul II is going to do in his analysis is really look deeper into the heart of man and what happened that kind of led to us having this tendency or inclination towards sin. So it's very beautiful while also a little bit painful to look at too, but I think really important. So first, I just want to start off with a little summary of Audience 26, and then we'll open it up for our conversation. So what John Paul II is going to do in these audiences is go back again to Genesis, go back to the beginning so that we can understand who is this man who is looking at the woman to desire her. And he starts by talking about the threefold concupiscence, which we find in 1 John chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. And you might be familiar with this. It's the concupiscence of the flesh, the concupiscence of the eyes, and the pride of life. And my translation growing up was the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and all of that. So that may be more familiar to you. But St. John says that this concupiscence does not come from the Father, but it comes from the world. So John Paul II goes from there and says, in order to understand what this all means, we have to go back. We have to look at the whole context of revealed truth about man, the entire Bible, go back to the beginning, that moment when concupiscence first comes into the world. So that's going to be Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, which John Paul II says is the key moment in which in man's heart doubt is cast on the gift. So these verses are really familiar to us. I'm not going to read all of them, but just focus in on a couple verses here. So this is where the serpent is talking to the woman, and she's explaining to him that the Lord said not to eat the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden or you will die. So this is the serpent's response to her. He says, "But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, and he ate." So there's a lot to unpack. Like we know these stories, we've all read them, but like when you slow down and really break it all down, it's so powerful and we can learn so much. So I would love just to hear your reflections on this, especially like what does that mean about casting doubt on the gift and this whole interaction with the serpent. So sister, would you like to go first?
I always go back into my teaching mode, since I taught middle school. So this is very important because it isn't, as we say, it isn't the eating of the apple that was the sin. It was the sin of disobedience. So God told them, don't eat. You can eat from any tree you want, just not from this particular tree. But I was reading one time a commentary and it pointed out, God didn't say you will never get to eat from this tree, but not now. And how often that is in our own life, we so often desire things before we're ready for them. And when we do, it doesn't end well. We know when we have a little baby, we don't feed it a hamburger. They're not ready for solid food yet. So we naturally give them milk and then soft foods until they're ready. And a 7-year-old doesn't normally get the permission to drive the family car. Maybe physically they could, but they're not ready for it, that responsibility and everything. So it's almost like this tree God is guarding. And it's not, he didn't say you will never get to have anything from this tree. I mean, who knows? But the idea was that God was saying, you're not ready for this. And it's not what would be good for you. We have to believe that God's plan for us is bigger and better than we could ever imagine.
Right. Yeah.
However, because they saw it was good, and they desired it for themselves. Again, it wasn't the sin of eating the apple. It was the sin of disobedience, doubting that God knew what was best for them and desired what was best for them. Wasn't withholding it out of greed or power. It was truly out of love. And so often we separate, real love from, what we want to not getting what we want. And so that's kind of where my mind went is the importance of timing. The tree is fine, our desires are gifts from God, but we have to make sure that whatever we desire, we also desire God's will and God's timing in things, whether it be a job. Maybe you don't get a job or promotion at a certain time, and it's until years later you look back and you're like, oh, wow, if I'd have gotten that job, maybe I wouldn't have been, home when my parents were failing and they needed my time and attention. Or if I'd have gotten that promotion, I would have been so much busier, and I would not have been able to be at my child's, games or special moments. So that's, again, kind of a nutshell where my mind went. It wasn't the sin of eating the apple or whatever. It was the sin of doubting God's eternal, unconditional love for us and wanting to kind of take that power to direct our whole lives onto ourselves. Yeah. I don't know what came into your mind.
Wow.
Katie?
Well, I did not go there, but I'm so glad you did, because that timing is, I can think of so many examples where I just knew the right time and exactly what I needed at the right time, and God did not allow it to happen, and how hurt and angry I was. Yeah. And then usually in hindsight, thankful.
Right.
Well, actually always thankful, because I probably wouldn't be where I am right now if all the timing hadn't have worked out just according to his will. So that's beautiful. I'm going to have to sit with that perspective for a little bit and think about it. I mean, I had like just an overwhelming sense of sadness when I was reading it. And maybe it was because I hadn't taken a lot of time to think about, I mean, we always kind of think about that original break and that original sin is just like, gosh, why did they have to mess up? And then we have to deal with this inclination to sin from now on because of their mistake, you know? But this time when I was reading it, it was just like this sadness, you know, of like, oh, you know, how nice it would have been to just stay in the garden and just stay united with God. And then I started thinking, oh, wait, that's what we're all striving to get back toward, right? And so that will be heaven. And right now, we just have to really think about that. And I think it's really important to think about that break and to think about, you know, that doubt. So, you know, the devil casts that doubt on the gift. And I thought section 4 on page 236 did a great job of talking about kind of that doubt. And it said, you know, the devil casts doubt in his heart in the deepest meaning of the gift, and he detached his heart. He shut out the light. And as I was reading through the commentary, they were kind of comparing receptivity versus grasping. And so that was, you know, the main part of what I was reflecting on is, you know, those times where I'm receiving God as love and he's the giver of all good. And I'm just like not trying to control the timing. I'm just receiving exactly what he's giving me when he's giving it to me. And then versus the time where I'm grasping and the time where I'm like, what God won't give me what I want, so I'm going to take control of the situation. I'm going to reach out and I'm going to manage it and I'm going to make sure I get it. And, you know, this, I think, is the world would tell you that's responsible, right? You need to, I mean, it's what America was built on, right? You pull it up by your bootstraps and you make it happen. Yeah. And there is a part of that that is good, but I think it's also a huge reason why we have to stay focused on this original break and where it came from and what we're truly trying to do. And so Christopher West always uses the rocket engine analogy. And he's like, so, you know, when you were describing what concupiscence was, you know, we talk about desire, like the Latin root, you know, is a desire, but we have to be careful because like desire comes from God. So it is good. Right. And so what Christopher says is like, it's all where you direct your rocket engine. So we need to be directing all of our desires up to God. Yeah. And concupiscence is when it comes from the world. And so when our desires get directed sideways toward worldly things, that inclination to sin, I think that is where we get upside down. And so all it is a twisting, right? Or a misdirection. So we're constantly just looking at our desires, which are good, and figuring out how to redirect them when maybe we might be going sideways.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, that's so good. You know, one of the things that was really powerful to me was when John Paul II is pointing out what it is that Eve accepted, the suggestions from the tempter that she was accepting in that moment when she turned and took that fruit. You know, basically he was telling her, like, God doesn't want you to have this wisdom. He doesn't want you to be like him. And so then what does that mean? If he doesn't want me to have this wisdom that is good, that means he doesn't want me to have good things. And he doesn't really love me, maybe, right? And maybe he just wants to control me. Because why else would he like tell us not to do something? If it's not out of love, if it's not out of goodness, then it's just because he wants to tell us what to do, you know? So I think it's a great sort of examination of conscience for all of us, you know, when I am when I've fallen in some way, like, where am I not believing that he is good? What lies maybe am I accepting when I grasp things for myself instead of waiting for him? So I thought that was really a good thing to sit with too. But I'm glad you brought up like the whole rocket engine thing and just kind of like this whole idea of like, where am I turning my gaze, in those moments of temptation? Because I was reflecting on Eve and the choice that she had in that moment. Like, she could have, when she saw the fruit was good, she could have had the response of like turning to God, to her creator, and saying, this is so good. Thank you. Thank you for the beauty of this fruit. And so in doing that, then that fruit becomes an icon. An icon is something that like directs our attention to God, right? That reminds us of him, that points us to him, and we can bring it to praise, right? And say, thank you. Thank you for the beauty of this. I see the goodness. It is so good. She could have done that. And then she would have maybe been more in tune with, like God's desire for her and make that her desire. But instead she like turns to the fruit and she sees the goodness and she turns to it and takes it. And then that fruit then becomes an idol, right? Because she's trying to get her needs met from that fruit.
Right.
Rather than turning to God. So it's all kind of in that gaze, like which way am I going to look in those moments of temptation? So this is really kind of the first time, this is the first time, not kind of, it is the first time that this has ever happened to man and woman, that they turned their gaze away from the Father. And so that's why John Paul II says the covenant was broken in man's heart. It's never been about the rule. It's been about that relationship, and like, am I turning towards him or am I turning away? So he really is getting to the heart of all sin, really, is that turning away from God who gives all good things, and instead to the created to try to fill up our needs. So audiences 27 and 28 kind of go together, talking about what happened when man and woman first fell into sin and the shame, this deep, deep shame that came up and the consequences of that. So he's going to look at Genesis chapter 3, verses 7 through 10, and I'll just read that. It says, "Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, 'Where are you?' And he said, 'I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself.'" So John Paul II had this really powerful statement. He's saying that in this moment, shame touches the deepest level and seems to shake the very foundation of their existence. So in audience 27, he's going to look at this. Why did man hide from his creator? And what is that? How does that indicate a change in the meaning of original nakedness, which we might have to flash back to what original nakedness was all about. But something has shifted within man, that he's got this fear. And in audience 28, he's going to really kind of break down the shame and talk about what Pope Benedict XVI called it relational disruption, which I think is a really powerful way to put that. But basically, there's 3 breaks that happen. And we're going to kind of talk about what each of these are. There was a break with creation. So just a disruption in man's sense of who they are. And my phone's ringing. That's embarrassing. Okay. That's never happened before. Anyway, the man,
it's a disruption.
Yeah.
Is what
Oh
you
my
were
gosh.
saying.
I'm just going to leave that in because that was an example of disruption. So it's a disruption in man's sense of self and in his place in creation. And we'll kind of talk about more of what that means. And then a break with self, or John Paul II uses the word imminent shame. And that's in man's interiority. It's a fracture within the person. And this is basically his first experience with like knowing what is good to do, but he's having trouble doing it. And he's having that division within himself. And then the third break is with God and with others. And those kind of flow from each other, which we'll sort of talk about that too, but that's also called relative shame. And so you go from like this interior sense of, I've lost who I am, I don't know who I am, to then I don't know how to relate and be with God, and then I don't know how to relate and be with the other person. And it really shows itself when they cover their bodies. Yes. And that is extremely significant. So we're going to talk about all of these things. Ladies, what had the biggest impact on you as you read these two audiences? Katie, what did you think?
I mean, definitely just, again, going through, I think, all of those different stages as you were, I think that was a great way to just walk through like all of the fractures, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's why it's so hard, and that's why it's so complicated to live here on earth.
Right.
And I think that, when I was reading through the text, this quote on page 239 really stood out to me, and it was talking about man being deprived of the participation in the gift. And it said that man alienated from the love that was the source of the original gift, the source of the fullness of good intended for the creature. It was almost like that break in what you were created for, and we're just constantly trying to get back and figure out, okay, again, those original questions. Why am I here? And what does it take to make me happy? And Bill Donahue had some commentary on a video, and I loved kind of putting myself, kind of like a Lectio Divina type thing, putting myself back in the garden, and right after it happened, God called out, "Where are you?"
Yeah.
And Bill pointed out he wasn't like physically trying to locate Adam and Eve, right? He wasn't like, "Oh, I lost him again. Darn, are they hiding behind the tree?" He was saying, "Where are you in your heart?"
Yes.
He was asking them, it probably was the first examine, right? Mm-hmm. He was asking them like, where are you interiorly?
Yes.
And it really just kind of goes back to how you can, the original quote, how you can be accused of adultery in your heart. Like, we're just called to examine where we are, not just in our actions, but in our heart. And so I think, as we go on in the text and he continues to kind of explain that collapse, he says, I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. And with original sin, this man of concupiscence, I knew I couldn't say it. And for anyone struggling with that word, I stumbled every time I read it. I used to just replace it with the word lust because I couldn't figure out how to, I would go back and look at the definition from the Catechism every single time it came up. And so I really, though, like the definition of a pull toward sin better than lust, because I think we really have to look at it a little bit differently. So with original sin, the man of concupiscence, so a man that is pulled now toward sin, took the place of the man of original innocence, which is that perfect union with God. And so when we look at that interiorly and we look at the fracture in our heart, that's kind of where shame is felt. Yeah. And shame is just, I think that a lot of people get a lot of different reactions with the word shame. Mm-hmm. Never really heard a positive reaction
of gonna be mine.
Of shame. Is it? Okay. Well, I won't go into it too much, but I just think that there is a good part of that. And again, if it's calling us to look interiorly and it's calling us to really figure out, like, what is going on in here? Where am I? As God was trying to call out to them, we can really look at it. Yes, it's sad. There's a loss of value of the body, and when we're naked, we're now fearful. But there is also like a recognition now that there is a value to protect. And so I'll let Sister unfold that for us.
Okay, well, you did a beautiful job and just nicely gave me a lead.
Oh, good.
Well, when you think about sin causes disorder. So we know that, again, as you've already mentioned, it wasn't being naked that was a sin. They were hiding because of their shame. But I always told my students that shame is also a gift from God. Just like when the first fall happened, God was already promising a Savior. We read in the Bible, about Mary coming and everything, and that Jesus would, fight sin and conquer it. So shame is given to us as a gift because it tells us, it acknowledges that we did something wrong, and it is pushing us, hopefully, back to God, redirecting us. Just like if there's something hot, and God has given us wonderful nerve endings, we touch something hot and we naturally pull back. Ouch, that hurts. Mm-hmm. Pain is not something enjoyable, but it's also a gift. It keeps us from further injury. Mm-hmm. So shame is also a gift because it tells us, one, we do have a conscience and we still can know something is wrong and that it has displeased God. Mm-hmm. It has maybe, even if we recognize it, we've given ourselves not the respect that we deserve. We have kind of sold ourselves short. We have not been true to who we are. We hear over and over, be who you are called to be. Mm-hmm. God calls you to greatness. John Paul II, when the new millennium was coming, he told the youth at one of the World Youth Days, do not be afraid to be the saints of the new millennium, So we need to have that. And sometimes when we fall short, there is shame because we know we've disappointed, maybe in a sense, our parents, or we've fallen short of what God desires for us. He wants the best for us. So I think that is a beautiful thing. I remember when I was small, I did well in school, and overall, I thought I was smart anyway, but it doesn't mean you're smart about everything. And we were taking a test in a science class, and there was one question I could not think of the answer for. And someone was sitting next to me, so I kind of looked on their paper and I saw the answer. I wrote it down. But as I continued through the test, I felt so shameful for cheating. So before I handed in the test, I went back to that question, erased the answer, and I wrote in an answer I knew was wrong.
Oh, wow.
And then I handed in the paper, of course, got that one wrong. And then the teacher would call each of us up to go over a test, just, and most of the time she would just say, good job. And then so she said, but she didn't call me sister, but sister, you missed this one. She goes, I know you knew the answer. And she goes, I think you put and she had an explanation for why she thought I chose that answer. And I remember going back to my seat, being so happy I missed that answer, not because I got the answer wrong, because I knew I did what was right. Yeah. I didn't, so their shame caused me to do something that was better. Like God caused me to be truthful. Yeah. God wanted me. So I think when we look at shame, we recognize there is feelings, disgruntled, or, there is a certain pain from shame. But if we look at it, even that is a gift from God. Everything He's giving us to pull us back to our original, holiness, innocence, and everything. He wants us to be united to Him, and He does everything in His power to get us back on the track. So that's kind of my thought.
I love that.
Michelle.
Yeah, that is so good. Wow.
I think every teacher needs to share that story with their kids. I really do. I think it would make a huge difference for them. Just to be thinking about that. Because I do think we tend to go the other way of this isn't a big deal. My parents will be proud of me if I get the good grade on the test.
Right.
They'll never know if I looked or if I didn't look. It's better to get the good grade, you know? And
Sure.
so to get them to start thinking about that, like, actually,
Yeah.
the best thing to do is to get the answer wrong if you don't know the answer.
And how often do you get to feel good about giving the wrong answer?
Right.
But because I knew it was the right thing.
Never would be my answer until now.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, thank you, ladies, for sharing that. And I think this was a little bit challenging to condense all of this down because, there are two audiences that are really jam-packed with a lot of things you could spend a lot of time with. I got stuck sort of meditating on God's response to Adam and Eve when they were hiding. And similar to you, Katie, I was thinking about like the gentleness of the Father asking questions, instead of like yelling at them, which sometimes, when you're a kid,
advice.
yeah, but sometimes when you're a kid, you'd rather him just yell at you than like make you sit and like think, because then you have to deal with your heart.
Yes.
And so I almost imagine that's such a fatherly thing that he did to like just question them. Where are you? What have you done? Like he's wanting to prick their conscience and encourage them to go deeper, which is what you were saying too. But I also thought, what else is he communicating? I think he's also saying, I'm here. I still love you. I didn't go anywhere. Like I'm with you. I want to hear from you. I want a relationship with you, which made me think about my own children, and I will probably cry. Not sorry. But I was just thinking like, this just actually popped in my head this morning. I was thinking like, as a parent, if I had to pick between a child who like totally follows the rules and never makes a mistake, but also never talks to me, or a child who is just struggling and stumbling, but lets me walk with her, like enter into it with her and be with her. Like I pick the kid that's struggling over the other. And I mean, I just think if I know that as a very, very flawed mother, like doesn't God feel that towards us, right? Like he's like, I just want you to come to me. That's all I want. I don't even care if you did it perfect or if you fell. Like all I want is that communion with you, And now I'm really emotional talking about that.
But what freedom it should give us, in trying to follow the path. It doesn't need to be perfect.
Right.
That God is just asking us because he loves us so much.
That's all he cares about. Like, I mean, I could give personal examples, but I won't because I'm trying to protect my the anonymity of my children. But I mean, there are times when maybe one of them's sharing a struggle with me, and I am like rejoicing in my heart. Not that they're struggling, but they're talking to me, So I just feel the heart of God in that, that's where he was in that moment. So that was one thing I thought about. And then I was thinking about myself and times I've hid from him and why and what that brought up and everything. And I mean, there have been times that I kind of pretended he couldn't see me, which is ridiculous. But that's the thing that we have to do if we're going to sin. We have to like
separate.
Yeah, we have to disconnect our hearts, which is what happened to them. And then I also, so on the part about contrasting, the man of original innocence and the man of concupiscence, John Paul II asked, like, what's going on with the interior truth and also the meaning of the body? And I won't go through all of this, but I did make a little chart that I'll share because I'm a chart kind of person, but it just helps me to see like the bigger picture, of like what happened here. But, if you want to go back, to season 2, if you haven't listened to that, we really get into like the way things were and like how he had full acceptance of his body and he had this deep inner peace and joy because he knew who he was, he knew where he belonged in creation. But then when he turned away from the Father and he cut himself off from this grace that was just naturally flowing and he was naturally receiving it, he no longer has that confidence. He no longer has this certainty body, all of a sudden he's super insecure. He's afraid in the world. He's afraid of creation that he was made to have dominion over and subdue, but he suddenly just doesn't know where he fits. Right? And he also doesn't understand his body. He's lost that meaning. Whereas before, like, his body was the sign of him being made in God's image, and that he was above all the other creatures in that. And so he suddenly has this fear and insecurity, and he wants to cover himself. And so, yeah, it's like, it is really sad. But I also was thinking, this wound of confusion about our bodies is as old as time.
Yes.
I mean,
I was thinking the same thing.
This is an original wound that we have. And so we see now in our world so obviously this wound being displayed is that people don't know who they are, and they're blaming their bodies. Right? For something that's very internal, very interior disruption, but they're blaming their bodies.
Issue.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps actually.
And they cover up the very things that make their bodies different, but also the things that symbolize the gift of giving and receiving. The very physical symbols on their bodies are the things that immediately get covered up.
But there's so much hope here. There's so much hope, and there's so much beauty. And it's hard to think about all the brokenness, but also every time we are tempted in this way and we want to grasp, that is an opportunity to draw closer to him and to allow him into our hearts, to change our hearts, and for redemption and freedom. So it's very hopeful. And I'm really grateful that we get to walk together through this. So really, that's all the time we have this episode. I'm so glad that we got to get together and talk about all these things. Next episode, we're going to continue talking about the man of concupiscence, specifically audiences 29 through 31.4. on the insatiability of the union between man and woman after the fall. So basically looking at what impact did the fall have on the communion of persons that man and woman were created to have with each other. So just please continue on this journey with us. We are praying for you, and we would love to have your prayers as well. So until next episode, God bless. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. We can be reached by email at befilledpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. There you can find additional encouragement in between episodes. Also, be sure to check out our show description for links to resources we discuss in the show, as well as questions for deeper reflection. Until the next episode, God bless.